college professor, Jim Tarvin, to lead us in Can Your Name Be a Prayer? His presentation for today. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm going to begin with a reading entitled, I Love My Children. I am your parent. You are my child. I am your quiet place. You are my wild. I am your calm face. You are my giggle. I am your compass. You are my wiggle. I'm your dinner. You are my chocolate cake. I am your bedtime. You are my wide awake. I am your lullaby. You are my peekaboo. I am your goodnight kiss. You are my I love you. Can your name be a prayer? Everyone has a name, even the first enslaved people in Virginia, who arrived on an English-owned ship sailing with a Dutch flag out of a Dutch port in 1619. In the first Virginia census, in 1630, the slave owners, in a futile effort to deny the slaves their humanity, did not list their names in census records. Whites often would use demeaning names such as boy or gal. But they had African names, which are lost to history, and English names such as Anthony and Isabella. They also had their own names used in slave quarters and among friends. But what is the significance, if any, of a person's name? Juliet in the play Romeo and Juliet argues there is no significance, although her father strongly disagrees. He is a Capulet who hates montagues. She says a rose by any other name may smell as sweet, but does a person by any other name feel and act the same regardless of their name? Johnny Cash says no in a song, The Boy Named Sue. That name Sue, given to a boy, heads him in a violent direction. He would have preferred a name like John. What if you named your son Mortimer rather than Mike? Mike, of course, is one of the most popular of boys' names. There are so many Mikes that 20 or so years ago, some of them formed a society of Mikes that holds a convention somewhere in the Midwest every year. For obvious reasons, lots of single women also attend. The study of names is called onomastics. Names are words, so they have etymologies, they have denotations, they have connotations. Given names, first names, and last names, surnames, usually derive from words with distinct origins. My examples will primarily deal with names used in Western Europe and the Americas. Names in other cultures around the world are equally interesting and complex. Let's start with surnames or last names. In Western Europe, few ordinary people had last names until the 1500s, when having last names became fashionable and often necessary. Some last names are place names, such as hill, lake, garden, field. You can see how easily last names like these came about. A village has several men named John. To differentiate between them, one is called John who lives by the hill, which becomes John Hill. Another is called John by the lake or John Lake. If John lives in a village called Greenville, when he moves away, his new neighbors refer to him as John from Greenville or John Greenville. When I taught freshman English at Orange County Community College, I had my students do research on their various names. It was a topic that self-absorbed young people found appealing. One girl, whose last name was Cowan, said she had no idea what it meant, but she knew her family was supposed to be German. After some research, she told me she found out Cowan was the name of a town in Germany. So I said to her, now you have to research that town. What was it like? The next week she came back and said that it was in southern Germany and it was famous for its vineyards. Then she laughed and she added that in her family, wine is always served at lunch and dinner. And the family jokes about it, saying, I don't know why we do this. We're not Italian. Now she said she can tell her family that the town Kewan, where they came from and where they got their surname, was a center of winemaking in southern Germany. That's why they do it. While some surnames are derived from places, others are vocational. Hunter is obvious, so is Guard. I knew a colleague at the college named Walt Guard. One of my students whose surname was Smith asked how it was possible to do research on her name. It was such a common name. I asked her what the word Smith meant. She did some research and came back and said that a smith or a smithy works with metals such as silver or gold or iron, and so is a silversmith, a goldsmith, a blacksmith. I then asked her if that connects in any way with her father's family. She said no. I then asked, what did her father do? She said, oh, he's an electrician. I asked if he had any brothers and what did they do? She said he had one brother. He was a carpenter. I then pointed out that they both were workers skilled with their hands. That is something that not many people can do. There probably were never very few people named Smith who were all thumbs. Another student had the last name Bloomer. He also knew his family was German. When he researched the word bloomer, he discovered a bloomer is a stove maker. He said his father was an engineer, but his father's father had made stoves in Pennsylvania. So in all likelihood, his father's father, his grandfather, was the last in a direct line of stove makers stretching back 400 years. Some last names match up with a person's career. That's called having an aptronym. I knew of a doctor whose last name was Doctor. He was Doctor. There's a person who writes about the need for plant-based diet. His name, Dr. Pollen. There's a hand surgeon named Mitten, a meteorologist named Blizzard. Freud studied pleasure. His last name means joy. Does the name point the person in that direction? Carl Jung thought so. Surnames also often reveal one's original nationality. Some names are obviously Italian or Irish or French or Spanish or Japanese. In some cases, the response by others on hearing such a surname is positive or possibly negative. After World War I, some Americans with German surnames changed their names or anglified them, the way clerks at Ellis Island routinely shortened and altered immigrants' names. First names are a somewhat different story, in part because they are selected, unlike surnames. Many are connected to British or European royalty. It's pretty sweet. if you have such a name, you might think. For example, the name James was given to a number of English kings. But names like James have biblical associations. The name James in the Old Testament is derived from the Hebrew name Jacob, who in the Old Testament was a deceiver. Not sweet. I once attended a wedding where the bride's parents did not like the groom. Their minister was aware of that. When the minister spoke about the bride's name during the service, Anne, which means God has favored me, he spoke of its glowing connotations and of what a wonderful young woman she was. When he spoke of the groom's name, James, he stressed that James is derived from Jacob, an Old Testament deceiver. I remember seeing the color red creep up the back of the groom's neck as he stood there next to his bride. For what it's worth, their marriage did not last. My Aunt Gertrude was born in 1908, and she grew to not like her first name once World War I occurred because it was so Germanic. My wife and I did not know Aunt Gertrude's feelings about her first name. And to honor Aunt Gertrude when she was in a hospital dying of cancer, we gave our daughter Elizabeth the middle name of Gertrude. We learned later that my aunt had grown to dislike her name. I still like the name because I loved and respected Aunt Gertrude. The giving of a family name to an infant to honor an ancestor is very common. I was named after a string of Jameses in my mother's line going back into the 1700s. I actually have a diary from my great-great-grandfather, James Cramond Allport, age 8. It's dated 1843. On one page, he writes about the joy of getting his first pair of new boots. His father, my mother told me, in 1815 had walked the battlefield at Waterloo several days after the battle, looking for a friend who might have survived. I was never sure that that family story passed down through multiple generations was true, but last year, one of my grandsons, Daniel, who is interested in family history, found an obituary from the 1800s that confirms the story. Was the history of my first name pounded into me when I was growing up? Not at all. But I came to know about some of the history through stories I heard. I'm sure that is true for many of you. If your parents gave you a popular first name, what does that say about them? Were they people who wanted to fit in, not rock the boat? Here's a list of the most popular names in America since 1879. For boys, number 1, James, 2, John, 3, Robert, 4, Michael, 5, William, 6, David, 7, Joseph, 8, Richard, 9, Charles, and 10, Thomas. For girls, number 1, of course, Mary. Number 2, Elizabeth. Number 3, Patricia. Number 4, Jennifer. Number 5, Linda. Number 6, Barbara. Number 7, Margaret. Number 8, Susan. Number 9, Dorothy. And number 10, Sarah. If you have one of these popular names, ask yourself if your parents were, we better fit in type of people. In my case, I think my parents were in that rather large camp, although they did give me 2 middle names, which always felt a little strange. My full name is James Hunter Turney Tarvin. Try taking that to kindergarten. I asked my students to ask their parents why they gave them the names they did. Many, if not most, of my students had never asked that question. One student, whose name was Sally, came back a few days later and told me in private what happened when she asked her mother why she was given the name Sally. She knew that her mother's sister Sally had died in a car accident when she was a teenager, and it was to honor that Sally that she was given her name, but she wanted to know what kind of a person Sally had been. Please tell me about her. Then her mother began to sob. When she had composed herself, her mother said, "You're old enough now that you are in college to know the whole story. My sister Sally was not killed in an auto accident, as we've all said. When she was 16, she was abducted, she was raped, and she was murdered. The man who did this was eventually caught and is still in prison." My student Sally said, hearing this, she was stunned. All those years when everyone else in the family of her mother's generation heard that name Sally, they were thinking of two Sallys, the one who died that horrible way, and the young, carefree girl Sally growing up in that household. I asked, "How do you feel about it now? And do you think they should have told you sooner?" She said, "No, I could not have handled it even 2 years ago. I understand why they waited. But now I want to learn all I can about that Sally. I want to live a life that honors her. And I want to do some of the things that maybe she wanted to do, but couldn't." Think of the power that a name can have. Another student told me how he felt about his name. He had a totally different story to tell. He said, "I hate my name. I detest it. I have the same name as my father, the same first name, the same middle name, and the same last name. I remember my father drunk, shouting and beating my mother in the years before they divorced. He still lives in the area. I have no interest. He has no interest in us, and we have no contact with him. When I'm old enough, I'm going to change my name, the name I hate." One of the difficulties with our names is that we have so many of them. For example, a child is born, a baby girl, and perhaps she's named Margaret Ann. Of course, she might then be called Peggy, or as an infant, Peggaboo. Later in kindergarten, she's probably Peggy again. But when she's in the 4th grade and gets glasses, probably some mean kids on the playground call her Four Eyes. In high school, she's back to Peggy, but her boyfriend prefers to call her Honey. In college, she's Miss plus her surname. When she gets married, she's Mrs. plus her husband's surname, or she may keep her surname. Then she may soon be called Mommy, and then later, Mom, and then still later, Grandma. And of course, then someday, her original names are on her gravestone. That's a lot of names. Before I conclude, I'm going to show you a video. And as you watch it, I'd like you to think about the many different names that this person might have. Isn't that beautiful and moving? I can't help but tear up when I watch it. There are so many aspects to the subject of names that deserve further analysis and discussion, but what I want to close with is to say that I think when parents give a child his or her names, they do it with the hope in their hearts that the child, that you, will have a wonderful life. They're not only honoring people you were named after, they're honoring you with that relative or ancestor's name. Your name is a compliment, a blessing, and yes, a kind of prayer for your future life. When you hear your name today and in all the days that follow in your life, you should recall that it was given with love and with hope for you. It really is a kind of caress from your father and your mother. Their love from the past returns again and again every time you hear your name. Your name is a blessing and a loving prayer. Thank you.
Thank you.